So first of all, my name is Judy Nguru. I'm the Senior Vice President of Strategic Development and Partnerships at Raxio Data Centers. Prior to joining Raxio, I was in the fiber infrastructure space. So I worked with Google Project Link, and so now known as C-Squared, so deploying fiber infrastructure across different markets in Africa. To answer your question in terms of the part that data centers play in the connectivity space, I like to think of it as we're the host of the brain for connectivity, right? This is where all the racks, all the compute power happens inside these data centers. So in terms of providing better user experiences, it comes to how close these data centers are to the community, to the population. So we often hear that, the question always comes up whether there are enough data centers in Africa, and the answer to that is no, they're not enough. We've barely scratched the surface. There's a deficit of 500 data centers across the continent. And so we need to continue deploying more and more data centers because we need to be able to host all this data that is being generated, both within the continent and also accessing the data that sits outside of the continent.
Thanks, Judy. Raxio was at a conference last year as well. What has changed from last year to this year? If you were to look back at your journey in Africa, East Africa in particular, what are some milestones you think you've achieved?
One of the major milestones is the number of markets that we continue to expand into. So Raxio has presence in 7 markets. The first is Uganda, that was operational in 2021. And then the next milestone is Ethiopia, which we are going to commercialize in October of this year. And then we have an additional 5 markets that are coming up, which is Mozambique, DRC, and Cote d'Ivoire. All of those will be coming up next year between May and June, or actually July. And then we have Angola, which is coming up in August. And then finally, Tanzania, which will be coming up in December of 2024.
Great. So a lot of action for a market over here coming up. And how would this affect, in terms of performance? What are some ROI kind of metrics that you can throw out there? Suppose I'm a business, I'm a government agency. If I use a certain kind of a data center framework or approach or a stack, what can I expect to get in terms of performance and things of that sort?
Okay, so we build tier 3 carrier neutral facilities, right? So we guarantee 99.98% uptime, availability on power. So the one thing I can guarantee you is that you will not have a downtime. And that's very critical, especially for governments and enterprises, right? Those are the concerns that we hear about, that networks go down. I mean, if you think about what happened at GKIA, that's something that you cannot suffer. All that data that they're collecting at immigration, what happened at that moment, where was it being stored? So when you're collocating in a facility like Raxio, your data is protected. So that's I think that's the benefits of what we do, what we provide. Then there's the security aspect. I was listening to the previous panel about vandalism and theft. Our data centers have 7 layers of security. It is very difficult for you to access someone else's equipment. So one of the benefits that data centers like us exist is be able to provide that sense of security for your equipment, for your racks, for your information.
Let's drill down a bit more into the different kinds of customers you have. Some are enterprises, some are government agencies. What are some similarities in their concerns? What are some differences in their concerns?
Yeah, so in terms of governments, a lot of the concerns is the sensitivity of the information that they carry, right? So we always engage, and whenever we move into a market, we engage with the government bodies ahead of time and explain to them the design of our data center facilities. So we have the ability to give you exclusive access to your own racks within the data center floor. So we work very closely with governments. In fact, we encourage them not to move forward and build their own infrastructure because we as experts in the industry can scope up the capacity that is needed for a particular market at a particular given time. We spend a lot of time analyzing the growth of that, not just the population, but even the data that is being consumed inside the country and being taken out of the country so we can be able to determine what size of facility to build. So governments are concerned about security and access to their data. Enterprises are very concerned about pricing. So we try to look, we work with them, we try to understand what it is that they need, whether it's a quarter rack, half a rack, a full rack, and then we advise accordingly in terms of what model of pricing would work for you. We also have CDNs who come into the data centers. Of course, their biggest concern is connectivity. So we ensure that we get all carrier neutral providers inside the data centers, all the MNOs, all the telcos. So for example, in Uganda, we have secured all 10 carriers inside the data center. That gives now all the players inside the data center access to different service providers. We have the ISPs as well who come into the data centers because they have customers that they need to serve. And the list goes on and on.
What are some of the legal and regulatory issues which come in over here? If you're a company or a government agency, what are some requirements for you in terms of hosting the data, in terms of where it is hosted, how secure it is, and so on?
So for us, the biggest one that's a big driver for uptake in our data centers is the localization requirements, right? And that we've seen cutting across different markets in Africa, especially for the financial institutions, where they're required either to have a PR or a DR facility within the country. So most banks will tell you that they have their own data centers, which is usually where the head office is. But then the question comes, where do you put your disaster recovery? And that's when we start now engaging with conversations. So these laws and these policies that are being passed across around data localizations, those are a big factor for us in terms of whether there's an opportunity in that market or not. Another one is regulating of data centers. So in some markets, I think they're still regulated using archaic policies that are targeted towards telecommunication companies and not data centers, especially our type of build. We are a pure play infrastructure provider, so we do not access data. We don't have end user data. And so when you look through those policies, you'll find that they're not fit for purpose for data center companies. And so we try to bring to light that information to the regulators, to the ministries, so that they can be able to develop better frameworks for data center companies.
And you've got an exciting announcement coming up, right, in just a few minutes. But before that, let me ask you, what's your message to the audience in terms of what are some trends coming up in data centers? What is your plans, your outlook for your roadmap for Africa, and how they should engage with you, what they can do with you? Let me just check on the session. Yeah.
So I think one of the biggest messages is to understand a data center company, our core business is power, right? So we sell an SLA on power. So when we talk about, I've heard statements come up about green energy and sustainable energy, and I want to guarantee you that Africa is one of the continents who produces a lot of green power. We generate megawatts and megawatts of power that is from hydro, geothermal, fossil, so we're already there. The issue that we're facing is distribution of power. And Raxio spends and invests quite a lot of capex on ensuring that redundancy, right? So we will we'll buy our own transformers, we will pay for the MV lines if needed to be able to ensure that our data centers have resiliency on power, and we can guarantee you that uptime on our SLAs. So my message is we should spend more time looking at power distributions in our communities so that it makes it easier for data center companies to move into those markets and be able to build even smaller facilities for the users. The trends that are coming up and what I expect to see in the next 5 years is not massive data centers, but smaller edge data centers that are closer to the communities, because the companies that are needing data center services want to be closer to their users. And then the second part is on fiber infrastructure, right? So we have a massive thousands of kilometers of backbone infrastructure, but we're very lacking on the middle mile and last mile. And that also affects where we place our data centers. We spend a lot of time looking at fiber networks, fiber routing, to be able to decide which plot of land we're going to utilize to build the data center.
And how are governments open to some of your roadmaps? You're finding a lot of cooperation, or we heard the previous panel talk about there are some roadblocks which need to be unblocked. So how is the roadmap so far?
So far, I think it has been pretty positive. There's been a couple of governments where they needed to understand more about what is data center operations. You know, do you have access to the data? What happens when data moves outside of their country? Who governs that? Who manages that? So we explained that. But in terms of just setting up of operations, I think there are some countries that need to be a little bit more efficient in terms of incorporation of entities, setting up business. But overall, we've received a lot of support. We focus on tier 2 markets, and we're starting to look at tier 3 markets. And what we've seen is that the governments of tier 3 markets are now looking at PPPs. Now they're coming to us and asking us to facilitate the development of the data center infrastructures in their countries.
Fantastic. So we have a breaking news kind of an announcement coming up right now.
Yes.
Can we go to the first slide, please? Announcement,
So I think on the first slide is just a quick visibility on our presence across Africa. And like I mentioned, we've already received 4 of our tier 3 design certifications for the 4 markets. We are now working on Angola and DRC. And the big announcement is on slide 2.
Next slide.
So we can finally, I think I've had a lot of people ask me a question about where we're building in Tanzania. So I can finally confirm that we're building in Mbezi Juu. That is the plot on the bottom left corner. That is where we're going to build our facility. This is a 6 megawatt facility. So phase 1 will be 3 megawatts. Phase 2 will be another 3 megawatts. That is based on the trends that we've seen in terms of data growth in Tanzania, and the routing of traffic and its connectivity to 6 landlocked nations. Of course, we offer all the services that are listed there: lift and shift, remote hands. So you never have to worry about having to visit the facility. We'll have those services available for you. So the big announcement is that we will be breaking ground in December of 2023.
So when we come back here next year, what can the audience expect? Any more announcements? Any new data centers?
I think what you will expect, number one, is that 6 of the 7 facilities will be complete and commissioned. So, you know, if you're looking for co-location services in all of those 6 markets, will be, you know, we're open for business. We're open for business now, so feel free to talk to me. And then there probably will be some new announcements, because our mission is to continue to serve the underserved populations of Africa in terms of co-location facilities. So there will be some new markets that will be announced in the next C2C.
Thanks so much. A big round of applause, please, for Judy Nguru from Raxio Data Centers. Thanks so much for using our occasion to share this great news with our audience. And I guess you'll be around for the rest of the day. So if you have further questions for Judy, please do connect with her. Can you take a question? Or sure, go ahead. Yeah.
Thank you. My name is Dr. Mzee, Director of Communication, Minister of Infrastructure, Communication and Transport, Zanzibar Government. The growth of data center in Tanzania has led to environmental regulations. My question is, what are challenges and benefits? Thank you.
Challenges and benefits.
Okay. I think one of the biggest challenges for data centers is land acquisition. So you will find that a lot of governments nowadays are building ICT parks that are dedicated for the development of data center infrastructures. So when we move into a market where that does not exist, it now requires us to either purchase our own land or get into a long-term lease with a seller. Because we spend a lot of time doing a site selection. You know, it can take anywhere from 6 to 12 months to identify the right location for our data center. So that land acquisition is usually one of the biggest challenges that we face. In terms of opportunities, now like I mentioned before, there's not enough data centers. So what happens is when you create more data center facilities, you create competition. You hold each data center player accountable. So you're guaranteed that you will receive value for the money that you're paying for that colocation facilities. So you do need to have more data center operators. The other thing is that the location of these data centers need to become a little bit more sparse, because of disaster recovery. It's better if you don't have a condensed location of data centers in just one city or one town, but we start looking outside of the major cities and start building infrastructure that address the rest of the population. And this is one of the things that Raxio is looking at. We actually call the solution satellite data centers. They're a miniature form of our standard build. And so our standard build is 375 to 400 racks. These are more 21 to 70 racks. And they can be built in remote areas. So if you're looking at going to Arusha, if you're looking at going to Dodoma, these are places that we can be able to deploy these facilities. So these are the opportunities that we're seeing. And they're necessary because there are populations and pockets of populations that need to be served. And if you remember Noah Miner's presentation when he was talking about the IX infrastructure needs to be protected. This is where all the switching and routing is happening. So you need to place that infrastructure in a secured facility. So these are the opportunities that we're seeing in terms of deployment of data center facilities.
Thanks so much, Judy. A big round of applause again for Judy Nguru from Raxio Data Centers. There were some more questions, but I'd invite you to catch up with her maybe in the lunch break just after this. We have